and I'm your African history teacher, Professor Hicks. And long time no here. Much water has passed under the bridge, and many events are continuing to shape our nation. As you know, I hope I just said Ashe. Okay, as you know, we are coming up to a celebration. Let me get my slides right so I can be in. All right, that's where I want you guys to see. As you know, we are coming up on our celebration of Thanksgiving, and many of you are preparing your dinners and family gatherings and for people to come over and all those wonderful things we do after Thanksgiving. Personally, me, I try not my damnedest to celebrate this day. I guess like others, I don't want to sit here and act like I am not guilty of enjoying, I should say, or engaging in the celebration. But consciously in speaking, I don't really celebrate this in many of the other Western holidays, I should say United States holidays, because most of them are celebrating our demise. Yes, most of them are celebrating our demise in one form or the other by war, oppression, slavery. Yes, it's unfortunate that our most of our celebrations are surrounded by these types of horrible events. And this one, no less. Thanksgiving, what you guys are about to embark on. Me too. I'm guilty too. But I take a conscious effort and I try to do things like this year. I'm going to, hopefully, I can show this slide to my family. And so before we, or as we celebrate, we can at least be conscious and memorialize those victims of this horrible day. And also, celebrate the fact that some of us are still here. And that those folks who were slaughtered are also still living. Their ancestors are still here. All right, so trying to think of if I gather anything. I haven't been on in such a while that sometimes I have to catch up. I don't mean to be that long, but unfortunately, trying to gather this information and get it right takes some time. So hopefully I can get a couple in today. I'm not going to be long to that. Hopefully I can keep this under a half an hour or more. So let's get started. As you know, we're continuing to celebrate or move towards a celebration of the semi-quincentennial. I think I got it right. The semi-quincentennial, and that is 250 years of America's union based on the Declaration of Independence. All right, let's remember that, because this taking over this continent probably has about 400 years, maybe more, but 250 years as a nation. I believe that's, if I'm correct. And they call it the semi-quincentennial. We had the bicentennial, I think, in 76. And so this is called the semi-quincentennial. And its celebration date is on July 4th, 2026. As such, you'll be getting so many different documentaries. You'll be getting, like, let me just give you some prime examples. The Atlantic News magazine has a whole month and about 4 or 5 different authors providing essays for you to read to give you their different takes on the revolution. You have documentarian Ken Burns on PBS. He has a American Revolution series going. It's quite interesting. I've watched already 2 segments. I'm trying to get the other 3 or 4. You have books being produced and articles in our magazines that are also talking to this American Revolution. And as you know, the American Revolution is what led up to the Declaration of Independence. With that said, unfortunately for us, and as many of these I have gone through, I don't mean quincentennials or bicentennial, I've only been through one, but these celebratory events of our wars, many of them fail to provide our role, our causes, our reasons to be a part of these events. Rarely is it spoken of in any of these revelatory media produced items I just recited to you, TV, magazine. None of them speak to us. And if they do, very briefly. For example, I watched a little bit of the American Revolution with documentary Ken Burns, and of course they do talk about us, but they fail to mention some really important things. I mean, they fail to give us any inside information as to why, besides taxation and no representation, but as to why we engaged or took on this battle to separate from England. It doesn't also give you any of the events that led to much of these declaration to this declaration. It doesn't give you many. Like one example is Bacon's Rebellion, and it doesn't talk to you about Bacon's Rebellion, how important it was to the revolutionary zeal that the colonists took on. It doesn't talk about Shays' Rebellion, like afterwards, and the sympathies and the how people felt about the country coming together as one. It doesn't take into account what women felt, not at all. It doesn't take into account what poor whites felt. It doesn't take into account, of course, what free blacks, and of course, it doesn't take into account what slaves felt, because slaves at this time were under a very repressive, oppressive condition. But we can imagine. So I'm here to help move that bar forward in regards to what our roles were, how we contributed, how our conditions fostered independence, and how important we are to this nation, no matter what war it was, battle, or conflict. All right, so we should know our place. So today we're going to talk about, in this brief time, we're going to talk about the American Revolution, but in terms of the early conflicts that molded this declaration, or move to this declaration of independence. What were the conflicts that contributed to this in the long run, not just the short term, the bluster we hear constantly about George Washington, James Madison, Thomas Jefferson, and what they did, how they fought and felt, and the writings of Jefferson, of course, and John Adams, and all these what we call founding fathers. But you're not going to hear what we had to say. And I say we, I want to say not just us Africans, but native people, poor white people, women, free slaves. What did they have to say, and what went on? So we're going to go all the way back to the 16th century, and we're going to start off with one critical event. And I'm going to be reading from my notes here to keep this very structured and coordinated. And of course, I'm looking at my time today. All right, I don't want to be on more than a half an hour. So I'm going to get to the slides, but you can use a slide right in front of you to kind of give you just an idea geographically where we're at. This is in Massachusetts. This is in northern or southern New England, like we would call today Connecticut, Rhode Island, those areas. Southern New England, and New England was given that name by the British. It used to be New Amsterdam, that entire area, including New York, because that's when the Dutch owned it. All right, so let me see if I can dive in if I've missed anything. No politics today, guys. We're going to keep it clean, all right? So in this series, The American Revolution, by documentarian Ken Burns, he characterizes the American Revolution as the most consequential war in history, and he might be right about that. There may be some credibility to that statement, for the war encompassed international participants. For example, the French, the Spanish, and the Dutch were all associated with this war, and each were affected by the war in terms that I cannot, or I don't have the time, it's too long to describe in this lecture. Actions of the war reverberated around the world. Thomas Jefferson, who's living in at this time in Paris, was speaking from a safe distance, and he said, "The tree of liberty," speaking of the Revolutionary War, "that the tree of liberty must be refreshed from time to time with the blood of patriots and tyrants. It is the natural manure." Now, of course, those words were written in Paris, and he wasn't here as the crap was hitting the fan, but this is Jefferson's take on revolution and on conflict or at this time. He felt that, based on the saying that, we need to have a revolution every now and then to replenish the tree of liberty with our blood. Many people today read these words and can say, yes, I agree, because the present administration of the Trump administration, that is, seems to be very oppressive or repressive, and speaks to demagogues. A demagogue, like Trump would be described as, speaks to them and what Americans must do every, or should I say from time to time, with their blood for the tree of liberty. Okay? The question is, whose liberty? All right, let's move on. 800,000 acres of Mohawk lands were taken, ending the Mohawk-New York friendship, which the Dutch had nurtured with the natives. Most of the natives, the Dutch who were here before the English, had nurtured a really good relationship with most of the tribes. They did not come in trying to destroy them. The Dutch came in to work with them. Their whole idea was profits, okay? They were some of the richest people in the world at the time, and they did this through mostly respectful and honest trading. I move on. So about 800,000 acres of Mohawk land were taken by these British, ending what we call the Mohawk-New York friendship. Chief Hendrick of the Mohawks is recorded as speaking of his bitterness to Governor George Clinton at this time. And he says, "Brother, we came here to relate our grievances about our lands. We expected to have something done for us. We expected something to be done for us, and we have been told that you would be able to do that. The Covenant of Change, which was a group, like a confederacy of Native Americans, of our fathers, has been broken by you. You tell us that we shall be redressed at Albany, but we know them well in Albany. We will not trust them. They are not people, but devils." Chief Hendricks from the Mohawk Nation, speaking to the British. Slaves were, of course, not recorded due to the conditions of slavery. So we have no historical sayings for slaves at the time of the American Revolution, but we could imagine what they must have been thinking, watching and hearing all of these colonists shout and protest about their freedom, while at the same time enslaving slaves, enslaving people, enslaving slaves and people within their midst. In Howard Zinn's classic national bestseller, A People's History of the United States, Chapter 5, called A Kind of Revolution, clearly emphasizes that most Americans, poor, landless whites, and indentured servants, free blacks, women, and of course slaves, did not support or understand what was the root of this independence. This revolution was not the bluster of stories and documentaries and TV shows that we have become familiar with, because most of the people in the country were not supportive of this revolution. We should know that this revolution was a popular revolution led by the elite, who were able to create a class of people, more as we would know them today, the middle class, to support their cause, and the middle class hopefully dragging the popular class, meaning the laborers and the workers, along with them. And eventually, that is what's happening. But we should know as we listen to the celebrations, and I want to emphasize it clearly, that based on the writings of those folks who were at the revolution, the writings, and there's lots of them, primary documents showing that the populace at large did not support this revolution. We move on. This revolution, as I mentioned, was not, I'm just going back over my notes, was not the bluster of stories and documents and movies. Freedom and slavery was like water and oil. The geography. We're talking about the colonial north and the colonial south. We're talking about the eastern seaboard. We're talking about anywhere from Halifax in Canada all the way down to South Carolina. These were some of the original colonies. For our focus, we're looking at the more eastern colonies today, but let me just give you a little information about them. The southern colonies at this point were the most profitable. They were the most profitable. Because of their geographic location, they were able to trade with places like the Barbados, the Caribbean islands. Those Caribbean islands at this time were being occupied and dominated by the French and the Spanish. Trade between these groups was constant all the time and never ceased. So Americans, before they decided to become American, but these British/American settlers were already trading with these people in the southern states. Now, in the eastern states, New Hampshire, New England, Boston, Massachusetts, Plymouth, we had the most popular part. We had more people than we had profits. So it's important to understand that as we move forward. The Declaration of Independence in our Union is rooted in conquest of economics and territorial expansion. That is, dominance and control of geographical areas and ultimately people. In African philosophy, there is something called ma'at. Like everything African, ma'at is based on nature and the science of life. One of its main themes is reciprocity. Reciprocity. There is also a saying that exemplifies the theme reciprocity, and that is, the errors of the father may be revisited on the son. That is the prism by which I analyze our American Revolution and our American history. Yes, reciprocity. What goes around may come around. It is, and let me go back to that. That is the prism by which I analyze our American history, and we incur the wrath of the as we incur the wrath of the Trump administration. It truly feels like the son is being revisited by the errors of the father. And by that I mean the actions that the Americans and slash British took almost 300 to 400 years ago, some of them seem to be coming back and playing themselves out in today's contemporary society. And that I'm referring to is the Trump administration's repressive actions on people in general in this country. Yes, reciprocity. The United States history is defined by dates and times of conflicts, battles, and wars. Yes. Our historical events and holidays are prime example of this. And Thanksgiving is one of them. July 4th could be another. And then Memorial Day as well would be another example of this. As such, to begin our journey of American history and this revolution, culminating in the semi-centennial of 250 years of union, we must begin with war. With the advent of our Thanksgiving Day celebration upon us, the Pequot War is an appropriate place to start. Many of us are very familiar with the state of Connecticut, known as a Constitution state. It is also known for its beautiful landscapes, historic sites such as Mark Twain's house, and its wonderful, wonderful landmarks like its Mystic Museum and the beaches. I grew up in parts of Connecticut and has wonderful beaches and, of course, many, many historical landmarks. But many of us are unaware of the roots to our celebration of Thanksgiving. Foundational Black Americans share a history, culture, and ancestry with these groups of people we call the Pequot people, who are the subject of this particular session. As you will see in our slides, Africans were the first Americans. Yes, Dr. David Imhotep proved that, and in my lectures, if you go back to my old lectures, you will see that Africans were the first Americans. And the Pequot, Lenape, Algonquin are some of the northeasterly tribes closely related to those blacks that were found here when those tribes, the Algonquin, the Lenape, arrived in the Americas. Now, just for a quick brief history, those folks arrived here 3000 BC in the form of Mongoloids coming from China and Asia. They did not look as they look now because, as most people come and immigrants do arrive, they begin to change for several reasons. Those reasons are, of course, like any newly arriving immigrants, they intermingle their blood and mated to produce many of what you see the tribes of today, the Pequot being one of them. The Pequot paintings, pictures, and documents testify to this relationship between us and them. It is one of the reasons why I chose this topic, because they are one of the few Native American groups that resemble us even still today. Yes, and you should see in the slides what I'm talking about. So let's get to what happened with the Pequot and the English, or newly arriving English. In 1637, a massacre of native men, women, and children, particularly the elderly, was done by British settlers. This massacre is celebrated today as Thanksgiving. Yes, your Thanksgiving, that you're going to sit back, eat, enjoy with your family, talk about stories, but mostly enjoying yourselves. You're off that day as well, as we know. But this celebration is based on the Pequot massacre. Let's listen in. This celebration also signifies the colonial elite's first use of the strategy of divide and rule. Again, not divide and conquer, divide and rule. We'll get to divide and conquer later. This strategy was used for domination and control, or social control. Native and Dutch people had mostly honest and equitable trade relations for a generation. The Pequot were the largest and most powerful tribe of the natives, and it was controlling the lucrative wampum and fur trade. They often competed with lesser tribes such as the Mohawk and the Narragansett over trade. So these tribes fought each other, as they had done for hundreds of years and generations. They fought each other. They competed for land and power. The Dutch, at this time, in the 16th century, were overthrown by the British, and the trading partnership became very contentious with the English. The weaker native tribes sought the British as allies against this traditional enemy, the Pequot. Unscrupulous trade practices by the British, expansion on native hunting lands, as well as violations of indigenous customs, created hardships and tension amongst the Pequot. In our next segment, we're going to dive a little deeper into how this massacre created our celebration of Thanksgiving. So, with that said, I want to take you through some quick video, some slides that will kind of emphasize two things. First, to give you a basic look at the massacre as you see in front of us. It's a picture of the British, and I don't believe this would be the Mystic Massacre that we're going to be talking about, the Mystic Massacre of May 26, 1637, which is kind of our focus. But this shows generally what the British were doing at this time. Remember, the Dutch did not engage in much war with the Native Americans. They came peacefully. But the English, our ancestors, the ancestors of this country, the persons who have produced what we call the founding fathers, are the ones who committed these atrocities. Now, this is an image of this happening, and you should see right away that whoever painted this image seems to be favoring the colonists over the natives, because there were plenty of battles where the natives also won. But those are not really depicted. But you can see in this image the savagery of what the British were doing in order to conquer these people. And as you can see, you see women and children. Take note of that. It's going to come back to us. Women and children. Now, here we go to our shared ancestry. You are looking at the native Pequot people. These are the people, these are their descendants who are living today. Now tell me, folks, does that not look like some of your cousins, some of your friends on the street? Why? Because they intermingled with the Africans that were here. And there was a large, strong contingent of Africans on the eastern seaboard, southern New England and Connecticut, when these folks came and arrived to their nation as Mongoloids. Just look at that picture. This is another picture. I want you to study it just a moment. Please excuse me. Well, this gives you another clue as to the savagery of the English colonists. Now, they are English at this point because the British are still, England is still the mother country. But these are the descendants. Their descendants, I should say, are the ones who are running the country now. And by the way, these are the Puritans that you read so much about who came over in 1609. Now let's look at this image quickly, because this image shows us the superior technology that the Europeans had come over here with as compared to the native technology in weapons. First, we can see that the Europeans have rifles, guns, and pistols. And we can also see that the natives are fighting with typical native weapon apparatus. Tools. They have bow and arrows. They have shields. And they have swords. And spears, along with some axes or hatchets, as they were called. Now, this is the technology that they only knew. They were not yet introduced to gunpowder and guns, but they were quickly learning what these were about. As you can see, our American/British settlers have superior technology and very, very good strategies to divide now and conquer. They have perfect strategies for this. Native Americans, on the other hand, warred in a different way. Native Americans warred in a way that they took captives. They had limited destruction on other villages. They had ritual combat, meaning maybe one and two guys or one another from the village would engage in a combat that would satisfy all. This was not the type of combat that the Europeans brought with them here. Okay? let's go to some more slides. Now here is a slide giving you another example of our shared ancestry and history with the Pequot people and all of the people of this area, the Algonquin and the Lenapes. This is how they look. This is today. These are their descendants. Look at them. Now, I try not to stretch the picture too much because I wanted you to see the details. Again, those look like our aunts, uncles, and family members, or at least people in our neighborhoods. Here's another one. You can still see in this picture the woman standing with the epicondral fold, which was typical of the Mongolians who came here before they intermarried, and you can see that on the woman sitting. But you also can very readily see the phenotypical traits of Africans. This is giving credence to my last topic of Africans were the first Americans, because this is who they intermingled with. Let's move on. We saw that slide already. Now here's a brother. This brother is from the Pequot. This is a descendant of the Pequot. Look at this man. Tell me he doesn't look like one of your uncles. Listen, folks, sometimes, once in a while, you got to throw away all that mystery in order to get to the history. You got to sometimes you got to take these racist books and documentaries that have been created that always leaves you out. It's like, how many of you have ever seen an Egyptian movie where there are blacks in the leading roles? None. And you're going to see the same as you go through other images talking about these people like the Algonquin, the Lenapes, the Pequots, the Muppiks. There's a whole bunch of them. And they look, and we all look alike. I think I showed this picture, but I didn't, but here's another one. Who are these people? These are the Pequot who look, as they looked back then, a mixture of both groups, Mongolians and African people. I think we showed this one. I think I have one more. I'm looking for one more. That's the one I'm looking for. Look at that sister. Tell me that's not my cousin. Long hair, straight hair, because one of the things, like in Egypt, when I was in Egypt, the first thing they do, all the statues, they crack their nose off so you couldn't recognize them. Can't crack the nose off this. But they have long hair. Don't let the long hair. We as Africans have so many phenotypes. In Africa, scientifically, you have the most variations of any humans on the planet Earth. You have the tallest people in Africa and the shortest. You have the lightest albinos and the darkest. You have the most beautiful Ethiopians and some of the most ugliest ones. You have pygmies, derogatorily called pygmies, and you have the tallest people in Africa. It's the same here. We look like everybody. Everybody, I should say, looks like us. And here's my final image. Another brother from this tribe. This is now. And I'm trying to make the connection so as we move along in these segments, that when you talk about native, you're talking about you and us, them and us. Some of them haven't yet to accept who they are, but that's fine. That's fine. We are cousins. And this is clearly demonstrated in these images. And I think that's going to be it. We showed you my uncle right there. and our next segment, we're going to deep dive into this massacre. And we're going to massacre. And we're going to talk about how Thanksgiving was developed and named after this massacre. All right, folks, so I'll see you again and later on today or tomorrow. And with that, I'm going to close up and say ashe and have a wonderful rest of the day.